So welcome everyone to the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology's Expert Series webcast. We have another fantastic program as part of our privacy law sessions today. This is the privacy law updates, the big one for the year. And we have two of the nation's leading experts in this that were kind enough to donate some time to us and join us today. So I'm going to go from my left to right on the screen. That may not be yours, but I'm going to try this. So I have to look away because I tried to memorize all of Jane's actions in her background, and my memory just won't hold it anymore. It is a long list of places that she's been in the privacy world. And what's really interesting is the variety of things that she's seen and the places that she's been. So Jane Horvath is a partner at the Gibson Dunn's office in Washington, D.C., co-chair of the firm's Technology and Innovation Industry Group and the Privacy, Cybersecurity, and Data Innovation Practice Group, which means she gets way more administrative work than she wanted to when she went to law school. But if you look at the background, in addition to being this lawyer, law firm lawyer, Apple's chief privacy officer, Google's global privacy counsel, and the DOJ's first chief privacy counsel. So you look at kind of that list, and that's a wide variety of things to have experienced and seen. So very much one of the kind of thought leaders for well over a decade in the privacy space. So Jane, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing with our listeners.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Wayne.
Well, I don't want to leave Hope out here. Hope brings the West Coast perspective, and I don't want to take Jane away. I mean, with the Apple and Google, she is a Californian, even though she's moved to DC. I think a decade in Silicon Valley makes you a lifetime resident. So Hope is from Los Angeles, so not a Northern California lifetime resident. But when you look at Hope's background, similar length in the privacy space. She's a partner in the data privacy and cybersecurity group there at White and Case. If you look at where she's recently been specializing, which is really kind of the cutting edge of what's going on with AI and the intersection of AI and privacy, the legal implications, the regulatory implications there. She is, I guess, the co-head the firm's global technology industry group. And if you know White and Case, its global presence is tremendous. So two very, very knowledgeable practitioners coming with a wide variety of experience. So this should be a great program, and one that even an old patent litigator like me is excited to see. So, and it's hard to get patent litigators excited about anything other than patents. So I'm excited to see this one. So with that, I will turn it over to the two of you.
Thanks so much, Wayne. Excited to be here, and I think that's an excellent transition on the AI focus, because that is where we intend to start today. As folks are aware, AI and generative AI has really exploded over the last couple of years, both in terms of the technology and what we're seeing of application of old laws to AI, as well as new potential AI regulations. So Jane, I was hoping you could kick us off by giving an overview of some of the AI areas that you've seen emerge over the year.
Yes, thank you, Hope. I'd be happy to. So AI is not new. It just came on everybody's radar in 2023 when ChatGPT took a step forward and made front page news. So AI has been in existence for a very long time. I even took a course on it a long time ago when I got my degree in computer science. But I think the most interesting thing that we're seeing, at least over the period 2023 to the present, is we're seeing some tensions between privacy laws, particularly GDPR. GDPR is the EU General Data Protection Regulation, is sort of the leading privacy regulation that a lot of companies have built their compliance program around. And we're seeing a lot of tension between the need for data that is AI. AI benefits from huge amounts of data. And one of the foundational principles of not only GDPR, but California's privacy law, most state privacy laws, is data minimization. How do you square the data minimization rules of privacy with businesses' need for data? So that's an area that we're definitely seeing. Also, training data. The European Data Protection Board has just come out with some guidance, but I would argue it's a bit ambiguous on how to square GDPR with training large language models using data scraped from the web. Those are two of the larger areas. I think AI is also very much disrupting cybersecurity. I sit on the Aspen's global cyber group, and the conclusion there right now is that they can't decide, is AI going to be good for cybersecurity or a net bad for cybersecurity? So those are some of the issues I'm seeing. How about you, Hope? What are you seeing in your practice?
Yeah, I think really similar to you, and I love that point on how does this fit in with the privacy laws. And I do think clients are evolving in their understanding of how to apply data privacy principles to AI. When it first came out, I think it was, AI uses so much data, gets so much better with data. We just have to retain all data indefinitely. But then we saw European DPAs not happy with that. I share a quote from an FTC settlement with a lot of my clients that says just because models work by retaining lots of data indefinitely doesn't mean that's a reason that you can ignore existing data privacy laws. So I think clients have really got that message. And one of my favorite things, we both have that practical experience from you being at Apple and Google and me at Snap and eBay. Engineers and data teams are so smart and creative. So now that they've gotten the message, I think we're really seeing a lot of interesting solutions on how to be protective of that data and also still move the technology forward.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing I want to add is data minimization sometimes is a misunderstood term as well. Data minimization doesn't actually mean that you don't have to collect data. It wants you to minimize the amount of personal information. So there are a lot of things you can do, like utilizing privacy-enhancing technologies that will enable you to collect data and still use data and abide by data minimization requirements without just not collecting data at all. I mean, some of the techniques are you could use a random number. If you don't need to know it's Jane Horvath's data, but you need to know it's a unique data set, assign a random number to it. You can process on device. That's something that we did a lot of at Apple. So, I think the interesting thing is, as you observed, is companies are starting to innovate and create sort of risk-reducing technologies, similar to privacy-enhancing technologies that can be utilized when creating and working with AI.
Absolutely. And I think really understanding the data, right? That's such a basis for privacy compliance, but we're seeing that for AI too. And those buckets, like what type of non-user data are you using? What type of really sensitive data are you using? One area that I talk about and flag all the time is biometrics, and I see this coming up. Are you training on images or
Oh, yeah.
voice? I get voice, people don't always associate with biometrics the same, and there's a lot of AI new tools that are very good at voice. So what is the training data in that, and how are you thinking through really tricky areas like biometrics, in particular states that have really difficult to comply with laws like the Biometric Information Privacy Act in Illinois, or some of the other more strict laws in Texas and Washington? What's the plan for that, and how do you kind of reconcile all the different data that you need?
Absolutely. And one other thing globally that I wanted to point out is the Korean Privacy Authority recently penalized a Chinese company that used Korean data without Korean personal information without their consent. And the penalty that the Korean Privacy Authority has put forth is that this Chinese company needs to delete the model. That I think will be really interesting to watch. And we do have precedent here in the US where the FTC has done the very same thing. So that will be interesting to watch. And I think watching the Garante in DeepSeek and that investigation in which DeepSeek has said that it is actually not transacting business in Europe. So that will be another one to watch. I mean, every day it's something new.
Absolutely. And I think bringing it home, another series of questions I've been getting asked a lot about lately are updates in the US on AI policy with the new Trump administration. I can give a couple of high points on what I've seen, and then I'd love to hear further from you, Jane. We saw the Biden administration was pretty active in AI, and had an executive order that was pretty broad sweeping. But still, in comparison to Europe or other places, really was an innovation first model. We've now seen the Trump administration come in, revoke the Biden AI executive order, issue their own order. And so that seems very drastic, but when you get into the details of it, the Trump order is really looking back at what the Biden order did and reassessing. It doesn't mean that everything under that is going away. There's been so much work over the last couple of years in agencies. And if you look to Trump's first term, the positions there align with a lot. So I think there is a lot of overlap that we will ultimately see. And then some themes, less regulation, more pro AI development, perhaps more on AI for national security, maybe more concern about deep fakes, less concern about bias. Like there will be some differences, but overall, I don't think this is maybe as huge of a change as it is getting picked up in the media.
I would agree with you. Also, I mean, an executive order, and even Biden's executive order, it is designed to, it only has a scope to cover the federal government and private industry that interacts with the federal government. And so the scope of it is not as impactful as a law would be. I mean, the EU has passed an omnibus AI law, the EU AI Act. We didn't see that in the US. So I would agree that even under the Biden administration, there was a hesitancy to regulate. Now, Colorado has an AI law that is a little bit more similar to the EU AI Act. And I think the states is where we're going to see the major movement on regulation, they will fill the vacuum like they did with privacy. They have filled the federal vacuum. And I also think we might see FTC action if companies make representations with respect to AI, with respect to their data use. I don't think we're going to see a sea change in the FTC's enforcement priorities.
I completely agree. And I think having seen the evolution of privacy, we have a good roadmap for what's going to happen
Yep.
in the States on AI. Though, two things that I'm noticing that are a bit different, and I'd love your thoughts as well. Even though the privacy laws are a little different here and a little different there, they're kind of on the whole pretty similar.
Yes.
For AI, we are seeing some that are very different and more that are narrowed in on a very specific area of AI. And to me, that's just because AI is so much broader. It's hard to do a bill that covers it all.
Yes.
But we have, ones that are focused more on automated decision making or deep fakes or election integrity. And that can be really challenging as a company trying to navigate. And I'm getting reached out to a lot by clients now trying to figure where they fit in. And then we kind of assess the buckets of areas that we think are most high risk for them and then hone in on that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think AI, we're sort of seeing a circle around risk, particularly in Europe. That's what the EU AI Act is based on. But with privacy, we had a set of principles that were developed way back in the 1970s that pretty much the Fair Information Practice principles make up the baseline of most privacy laws. Whereas I think AI is very reactionary. And I fully expect if there is something catastrophic or damaging that happens with AI, we're going to see a sector specific or an action specific law coming out. So I think we'll probably see some reactionary laws. And, I ask a bunch of colleagues that are steeped in this area, like, particularly when a lot of the providers were asking for AI to be regulated. I said, okay, well, how do you do that? How do you regulate AI? And I think that's the biggest challenge. And I think that's why we're seeing so many different forms of this attempt to regulate.
And I also see a difference in versus privacy. I think companies for privacy, of course, everyone has data and is using data, but companies know more heavily if that's really their business model, or they're processing a lot of sensitive data. They know if they need to focus on these privacy laws. What I'm seeing is companies that aren't traditional tech companies or data companies being swept into some of these AI laws. Particularly, I'll use Colorado as an example. Pretty much every company is using AI for some type of recruiting and resume sorting.
Yes.
And that pulls them all in a way that is not necessarily expected.
Yes, and changes, I think at first there was this idea that AI is going to simplify everything and we'll be able to turn and have AI do everything. But I think these regulatory impacts, and I think the other area that people are surprised by is they think AI is not regulated. But as you've already observed, there are a lot of existing laws out there. And so like one of the new shiny AI terms is agentic AI. And, this is that idea. And there are some benefits of agentic AI. It's AI that is designed to do one particular action or a type of action, a subject area action very well. And agentic AI has the benefit because it's only doing one thing of maybe having a little less hallucinations, but it's autonomous and it's making decisions behind the scenes. And I was recently in Abu Dhabi for Finance Week and sat on a panel on agentic AI with two providers. And one was talking about, in fintech, it's going to make all these trading decisions and I thought, well, but there are financial regulations out there. And in particular, there are some financial regulations that require that a decision be made by a person. It's not an AI law, but AI is not a person. So I think that's the other area when you're advising clients, you kind of have to think out of the box and look at existing laws to see how does this automated AI fit in with requirements that are already there, particularly for regulated entities.
Absolutely. And another area that I'm seeing a lot of on existing law for clients is when with respect to their AI outputs and what type of liability do they have on those outputs. And that's, pulling many laws that have been around forever, including
Yes.
tort laws, defamation, hate speech, election, and like a whole host of even criminal aiding and abetting liability, that there's long-standing laws and precedent, but you have to think them through now in these new ways.
Yes, absolutely. And then you also mentioned automated decision-making technology. We are looking right now with the end of the comment period. California has proposed regulations on automated decision-making technology. And I think every listener should look at the definition of automated decision-making technology, assuming it stands after the comment period, but it is incredibly broad. And, a lot of the requirements in there are going to hit AI systems square.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been waiting for that language, what seems like forever. And I think we'll have potentially could have such a huge impact across so many different products and types of technology with the kind of the broad language that we're seeing there.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're seeing, again, I think California, similar to being first in privacy and strong in privacy and state laws, wasn't first in AI, but I think really trying to have a strong presence. There was close to, I think, a dozen AI laws passed. And I saw a lot of the news coverage on that. There was one bill that Governor Newsom vetoed, and that got a lot of press. And I think it was a misunderstanding because of that California didn't pass an AI law. But there are so many other ones that cover healthcare and transparency and data training and the IP and celebrity rights, and then with the automated decision-making technology, I think it's just going to continue to really expand in California.
Yes, which I've heard a little rumor now that I'm back in DC that there may be some consideration of some preemptive legislation. I mean, those of us, we've been in the privacy world a long time, and we've watched the states promulgate their privacy laws, and we've seen a couple of different legislative proposals on privacy not make it out, to a floor vote. But I did hear Ted Cruz is looking at tearing up the previous drafts and using the Texas law as a baseline. I'm also hearing that there's a lot of discussions and lobbying going on up on the Hill about AI. And, one wonders whether in this zeal to have less regulation, whether we might see some preemption.
And that would be super interesting. And I think, I have long hoped for a federal comprehensive privacy bill, just because it gets so hard for companies to track all of the states and the differences and update compliance. And I think with AI, like we said, there's so many different types of bills. And They're also, I should note, like many of the privacy bills have a revenue threshold that if you're not hitting, you're not subject to those. The AI laws in the states really don't. It's just if you're using AI in that state, essentially. So it's pulling in a lot of really small businesses. And that's a really high level of compliance to have to do as a new company.
Yeah, and the California law that you were talking about that was vetoed, SB 1047, regulated the development of AI. But even before you put it on the market, developers had to do things. So that's another, because a lot of companies develop, they're confidentially. They don't want to talk about what they're doing. And it was ultimately vetoed, but we may see the senator who sponsored it would really like to propose another version of his bill. And I think that is a really interesting area to watch, where the actual writing of the code before it's put into commerce is regulated.
And there's so many different pieces for companies to think through, and you're not necessarily off the hook. Right? These laws are covering if you're a developer or you're a deployer, or as I mentioned, if you end up using in your recruiting system. So they're really far reaching.
Yep. Yep.
I think it'll be interesting. I haven't seen a lot yet. There's been some FTC action as we get into enforcement and on these state laws. So a couple of the California ones went into effect, but more of them in the Colorado will go into effect next year. What I'm seeing in state privacy is the states that get the highest attention in terms of compliance are the states that are following through with enforcement or have a very active plaintiffs bar. For example, I mentioned biometrics in Illinois. That has really forced a lot of attention on biometrics and biometrics compliance because of the activity there. I think the interesting thing that we're seeing in states recently is Texas really emerging and having enforcement in a lot of different areas. So we talk a lot about California, but I think this year Texas may be the one to watch. And with that new privacy law, there's some tricky and interesting distinctions to pay attention to from some of the others. And I think that's an area where we'll, a state where we'll see more.
Well, interesting enough, the state of Oregon sent out cure letters to a number of different entities. And so I think we are going to see state AGs utilizing their new authority under privacy laws to reach out and enforce. I think it's a bipartisan issue. It's a good one that politically it sells well, that you're looking out for people's personal information. And as we see more and more states, it compounds and becomes so much more difficult, particularly because they're not all the same.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on this a bit, but we've been focused so on the US. How do you think it fits in the US models compared to what we're seeing, as you mentioned, with the EU AI Act in Europe or some of the actions in Korea? How do companies navigate on the global scale?
In privacy, it used to be in privacy that if you built a GDPR compliance program, you were pretty much 90% of the way there. Then China passed a privacy law. It was pretty much a data localization law. But, suddenly it changed things. There's a bunch of different models out there. They're not all GDPR. And I think with AI, as we discussed earlier, there's not one model. I don't think we're seeing the Brussels effect of the EU AI Act. I think the more interesting question to wonder about is, in light of the Draghi report, in light of some economic pressures in Europe, are we going to see a change in enforcement, in particular with the EU AI Act? I do not think that the privacy regulators are going to take the foot off the gas. I think they want to remain relevant. I think if you're looking at a harms-based approach, it's, with AI, it's disinformation bias, but it's personal information to a large extent, and then intellectual property. So who is the enforcer with personal information? It's the DPAs. So we saw it with DeepSeek. It was less than a week before the Garante had blocked DeepSeek from Italy. And we see the EDPB acting in concert. That's the regulatory body that ensures that the GDPR is evenly applied. We're really seeing them take these issues to heart, issue guidance. So, I think it is tough to prognosticate, but Korea came from out of nowhere with the model deletion. So I think that's the other. We should expect the unexpected.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And it's interesting, and we touched on kind of the early days and the data collection. It really was the efforts from the European DPAs that created a very quick shift in what we were seeing from AI products. I like if you follow the products and look in the apps on what they're doing, there was a huge shift to more transparency, more consent, more options for deletion, explaining larger disclaimers. And that really came from the DPAs. And I agree that that will continue. And it's been interesting because similarly, I think a lot of our clients were used to just, as you mentioned, kind of targeting the GDPR.
Yes.
And then making a few smaller tweaks here or there, but like mostly you're covered. And I've had a lot wonder if that's going to be the same with the EU AI Act. And I really don't think so. I think Europe had the advantage of having a long-standing privacy compliance in place and principles, and just a belief from Europeans in the value of privacy, and put GDPR through so much ahead of many other countries that it was really set up in place to be modeled after. AI, we're just not seeing that, and we're seeing competing ideas and strategies. The US doesn't want the same type of really prescriptive approach. The US wants to allow innovation. So I don't think the US laws are going to mirror the EU AI Act, and I don't think companies are going to be able to hit their compliance on the US ones by just doing EU AI Act.
Yeah, and I do wonder, particularly after the AI summit in France, and where there's a lot of urging, the EU wants to be an AI champion and an AI innovator. And will we see some of that deregulatory push? Will we see them take pens back to paper? We're waiting for the voluntary code of conduct to come out, and we're already seeing companies that said they were going to sign on are now not going to sign on. So I think that's the other interesting thing that we're seeing. It used to be with the Brussels effect, particularly GDPR, people complied. It was 4% of global annual turnover. But I think what we have seen in the last 2 years is companies are starting to not release their products in Europe. And that is going to be the other interesting thing. And, particularly at my old company, we were always designing for a global rollout, but we are now seeing companies purposefully excluding markets. And that will be another area that we will be counseling on, is they're looking at different systems. Should they exclude a particular market because it's too high a risk to roll it out in that market?
And too difficult to comply with. I think I see a lot of clients that really want to comply and put a lot of effort into it. Because of the way AI works and some broad drafting, I think the EU AI Act may be pulling in scope things that aren't necessarily intended. And with
Yes.
the risk being so high, no one wants to be the one to push that. But the products just don't function without being able to do some of the things. And some things that have been going on for years before
Yes.
this
Yes.
are now, that users are well aware of and used to, are now maybe within scope in a way. And so with the products already built, companies can't walk that back.
Yes. Yes.
You touched on agentic AI for a bit, and that's one that I wanted to talk about a bit more, just because I find this to be really the area that is kind of exploding this year. I would say
Yes.
6, 7 months ago, I wasn't really hearing about this, and now so many of my clients are really interested in this. I think as you mentioned, the products and use cases are really interesting, but it gets so complex in rolling it out from a compliance perspective. How do you think clients should be thinking about that?
I mentioned earlier, first off, you need to look at existing legal frameworks because the agents are designed to do a particular task. You may have multiple agents. So you might have a long process and one agent will do due diligence, another agent will draft up a risk matrix, and you can have agents that meet with each other and talk to each other. So how are you accountable for the decisions that these agents are making? And I think, it will be very important as the product is being designed to look at governance frameworks and put in place. And I raised earlier the human person making a decision. And a lot of AI frameworks that we're seeing and governance frameworks say human review. And that sounds very, very easy to write it on paper. You just have to have a human in the loop. But with agentic systems, where does that human come in? I mean, with AI in general, that's processing a large number of records, how do you put a human in the loop? And I think that will be one of the more challenging because I have clients and they've put a governance structure in place that says all of our systems will have a human in the loop. But this, again, you need to make sure that that's actually the case with agentic AI, because again, as we know, the FTC regulates public statements you make on the website, representations you make. So these are the areas that I think the companies will need to be very, very careful about.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's another one that comes up in that space that I've been seeing. It's not new or particularly difficult to think about, but as different agents are interacting across the web with other websites, you
Yep.
need to think about the terms on each of those sites. And that's really difficult. So how do you do that? Are we going to see more companies coming together and having like a business enterprise type relationship on these kinds of products? Or what other options are there for thinking that through?
It's really fascinating. Yeah. Processing, sharing of data, all of that. Again, the common frameworks come into question again.
So one other area that I think got a lot of attention the last couple of years, and then perhaps we're shifting away from this, I mentioned in the updates, but the kind of bias and ethics piece of models. What are you seeing and what do you think about clients working through kind of bias issues?
Well, I mean, I think there is this is a hot topic right now and a hot political topic, but I think there is a fine line if you have a system that is constantly outputting biased output. it still, again, can call into question existing laws, laws of defamation, laws that are already on the books. So just because there is a step away from diversity and inclusion doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking at some of the effects that could actually trigger other regulatory environments. Misinformation is very, very tightly rolled in with bias. And as we know, AI hallucinates, it makes stuff up. So, all of these things, all of these outputs need to be examined in the context of existing legal regimes. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because it's beyond even when you get down to it, it is beyond even perhaps traditional DEI considerations. An AI can be biased in a really weird and unpredictable
Absolutely.
way.
Yep, well said.
And so it's important to our clients, because if you're having this bias, it just probably means your product isn't working as it was intended to work. So I think even absent more regulation or penalties on this, companies are paying attention.
Trust. It goes to corporate
Yeah.
brand and corporate trust. There have been some story, this AI has done this or that, and people laugh about it, and it ends up on social media. And, that's the last thing a brand wants, is to be made fun of on social media.
The difficulty that I see at Snap, we worked with a lot of really amazing engineers and some that were focused on this. It's really hard to test for bias, and
Yes.
like, even when the tests on the tests for bias show that those are bias. So even when you're trying to solve for it, I think that in itself is a challenge. What I see a lot of companies do, and what I recommend, is you have whatever your bias testing system is on the front end pre-launch. And then you need to have some check, and probably that human that we're talking about after the fact, to see what is happening, how is this coming up, and then update accordingly, because something will probably happen.
Yep. Great advice.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Are there any last issues that you think we should raise for looking into this next year?
I think everybody should fasten their seatbelts, because I think it's going to be a very exciting year full of change. And if we get together again next year, we'll have tons to talk about, because I think we're just at the start of a very disruptive cycle.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that the thing to look out for, as has been the case, and I think we'll see more, is as AI and privacy intersect with other areas. But like you mentioned, what happens when it goes into financial areas? What happens when we go into new tech like wearables, or
Absolutely.
the biometrics? I think there's whole areas that will continue to really take off as the year progresses.
And I would be remiss not to mention again cybersecurity. I think, a lot of companies do phishing tests and do AI tests. They do breach training. The attackers are using AI are much more sophisticated. So those trainings are going to need to get more and more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you both. I mean, just fantastic. And the takeaway from my perspective is, the Silicon Valley theme has always been move fast and break things. That doesn't really work in the privacy and security or cybersecurity world, because if you break things, there are enormous penalties, and maybe you lose your entire product line. So this is a place where, as much as you need a data scientist, you need somebody that's pretty well versed with your privacy and your cybersecurity regulations at the beginning of the process, not after things are broken. And it's amazing how many people I see not recognize that. They're like, we'll figure that out later. And by that point in time, it's no longer in your domain. It moves over to the litigator's domain. So it's too late. So I hope people hear that, and that this is not a place that can be navigated alone anymore. It's just too complex and changing at a rate that I hard pressed to find anything in the law that has ever that's moving this fast. The law's moving, the technology's moving. So I think that means that the two of you won't get any vacations for a while. So with that, again, thank you. I know this is time away from your day, from your families, and you've donated it to Berkeley. So we very, very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.